yeah. So everybody's kind of starting slowly to get prepped for the hurricane. It's coming. By the time it gets up here, it's going to be a tropical depression or whatever. It's not going to be really significant. We're just going to get a lot of rain and some winds, and it kind of sucks because once the ground gets saturated and the winds move in, pine trees have a tendency to wind up on the ground and wind up across power lines. So today I was at lunch I took off real quick to run to the grocery store and just stock up on it, make sure it's like okay, we got water, batteries, just a couple things, and also grabbed a box of those they're like tea bags but they're coffee, so they're little like single serve coffee bags, which came in really handy a couple of years ago when we lost power for a couple of days, because everybody, my neighbors were lamenting they weren't able to make coffee, and I was out there at my backpacking stove boiling water and making coffee, and so I was able to finally point out to the wife, like, see, this is why we needed this is why I needed a backpacking stove, right? And so anyway, so I go to the grocery store and go, finish up work, stuff like that. And about 5 o'clock, like our doorbell's going off and dogs going, bananas. And one of the kids is like, "Dad, there's some guy on the front porch. Don't recognize him." And so I walk over, look outside, and some dude standing on the front porch. And I was like, "All right, what's going on?" So I go out there, and he was like, "Hey." He was like, "Are you, Mr. So and so?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." And he was like, "I think you dropped this at at Lowe's, the grocery store." And he handed me my wallet. Um, apparently, apparently, I dropped it in the parking lot when I was loading up the car. Didn't even notice it, man. And like everything was in there, man. My cat, cash, like everything. So, dude, I pulled every single bit of cash I had out of my wallet and shoved it at him. And he was like, "No, man, I'm getting." He was like, "No, no, no, no." But I made him take it.
That wasn't very gray man of you.
No, no, that was not very gray man of me at all. And then of course, I come back inside and the kids are and the wife's like, "Who was that?" And I'm standing there, with my wallet and my
Nobody.
cash, like, yeah. And so it was like, I had that split second of like, all right, just lie about that, right? And it had, I couldn't. I was just like, all right, knowing full well that I'm never going to hear the end of it, right? I mean, this will be told, in family folklore 100 years from now. So I had to come clean and
So
take my take my
what was
lumps.
your demeanor like when you answered the door? Were you like butthole-ish? Because I can only imagine myself, right? Because like nobody comes to my house and I have a sign that says no soliciting whatsoever. I see somebody up there and it's like, you can't read. I answer the door, I jerk the door open, and I'm thinking in my head, what does this butthole want? So I mean, did you answer the door that way or were you
No, not really, because one, I was a little caught off guard. We were, the wife's, it's getting dinner ready and everything. The dog, the dog's kind of going bananas, and so but when I looked out, like I saw, because the guy was driving a work truck. English was not his first language. So I had to, I dug back into my Spanish vocab, and but when I saw the work truck, every once in a while, we'll get somebody in the neighborhood, poke around and be like, "Hey, I'm trying to find an address," or something like that. And I knew immediately by looking out the door and stuff like that. I knew he wasn't a solicitor. Like if I see somebody standing out there and they've got like a clipboard and like a company shirt on, and they're solicitor, like they're getting the butthole in me coming out. But it's, dude, I don't know, man. It was just I looked at him. I was like, and he looked like he was smiling. It's like he's just like a genuine nice dude. I was like, he caught me off guard. He caught me in my weaker moment, so I was nice when I opened the door. But
Getting to be that time of year in Texas where you might want to answer that door because it could be some kids selling some tamales for a school fundraiser. Man, those are the best.
ooh, yeah, ooh, man. I wish nobody does that around here. I wish we had that.
Dude, I got a guy who delivers it to your house. So I found him on Facebook Marketplace, like, I don't know, 2 years ago, whatever. And I guess twice a year he does this. So, and they're stupid cheap. He does like the red, the green, the chicken, the beef, whatever. And I got hammered one night. And so I'm sitting here on Facebook and I seems like I think I actually said tamales. Like I think like a Hardee's tamale commercial came up, and I was like, "Oh man, I want some tamales." So of course, Facebook listening, pops up, "Hey, local dude near you." So I'm like, message him like, "Hey man, you still doing tamales?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Can you deliver to the house?" He's like, "Yep." I'm like, "I'll take 3 dozen." Yeah, and I mean, you have to schedule it. So I mean, it takes it's like 3 weeks out or whatever. I think I even brought it up on an earlier episode, but sure as shoot, man. I spent the money, and I'm like, man, this dude's never shown up in my tamales or whatever. And he showed up, man. He knocked on the door. He's like, "Hey man, I got your 3 dozen tamales here." I was like, badass. So
Man,
I think you're right. Waiting for that time of year.
first of all, I find it hard to believe you were at home hammered on any particular night. Number
I know
one.
it's pretty crazy. It's pretty
Number
crazy.
two, in Queen Creek, what do they make or Apache Junction, what do they make tamales out of? Like prickly pear leaves or something?
I don't know, man, but I think that's where he actually was from was Apache Junction. So they all come down here and sell. So he just does his rounds. I mean, the guy probably had like 500 tamales in his truck. But I mean, I don't know where you live. I'm assuming it's the same. There's so much new construction going on around here that they just sell them right out of the coolers.
Oh yeah.
And if you're not out there at like 6 o'clock in the morning, I think I've gone out there once a couple years ago. Lady down the street had them in her cooler or whatever. And by the time I got there at like 6:30, she had like 2 left. So if you're not there at like 6, they're gone.
Dude, that was what was good about DC. That there's very very few things good about DC, as you guys know, but wherever there's new construction going up, you're going to have a lot of Hispanic workers. And we were going to this class every day. I can't remember what part of DC it is. I'll think of it in a second. But I was noticing around lunchtime, all the trunks were opening up and people were selling tacos out the back of those trunks. And people were like, "Man, we only have 30 minutes for lunch. Do you think we can make it to that sandwich shop?" I was like, "No, man, you got to go buy the tacos from the people selling them out their cars." And all these weenies are like, "Ooh, but you don't know, you could get sick." And I'm like, "No, man, dude, it's worth it. It's worth
Yes.
getting sick for these homemade, handmade tacos, man, with the carnitas. Oh man, so good. Talk about enriching the culture, but the very people who think that they want to enrich culture are too afraid to eat out the back of a trunk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, that was like the dude, that was like the taco truck, near where we all used to work. Man, the taco truck. That plate, dude, I can't imagine. I never wanted to poke my head inside that thing because I did not want to see what the sanitary condition was on the inside of it, right? And nobody did. Everybody was like, I don't, bro. But the tacos, the quesadillas there, and dude, like you said, the carne. Oh my, dude, it was. I mean, it would slap your grandma good, And there may have been 2 people there who actually had some paperwork that authorized them to be in the states and allow them to work, and the rest were all it's like the guy who we got to put up our fence and sod our backyard and take out some pine trees. He's got a credit card price, and then he's got a cash price, and the cash price is significantly lower. And he's got a couple guys on his crew, like when he comes to talk, it's like, hey, all right, hey man, here's what we're doing. Like he's got a couple guys on his crew that they keep their distance. They don't talk to you. They talk to him. But they don't talk to you, man. And and he's like, yeah, I kind of need cash for them. And it's like, hey man, not a problem, because they are skilled laborers, right? They're not people talk about unskilled. No, they're actual skilled laborers, and they're absolutely worth it. They're here, and like you said, man, they're enriching the culture. But yeah, man, dude, selling tacos out of the trunk, yes, that is where you need to go, because that's where it's at.
Well, I
That's
mean,
where
let's
it's at.
admit it. I mean, look at all the places we've been and what we've eaten. That definitely will not be the worst thing I've ever eaten in my life, and that's not going to be the thing that kills me, right?
Yeah.
Look, you were having some tell. I was so surprised when you said, I'm not gonna ruin it. I want you to tell the story, but you sent a picture of blank. It's what's for dinner, and I was like, man, Roger, what is he eating? He's eating poor people food. What was up with that?
I ate goat, dude. You know what it is? And I was just thinking about this too, because downrange, you guys know how it is. We eat lots of goat. And for those that haven't been to some of these places, so you basically have lamb or sheep, and then you have goat. And all your people with high dollar, they eat sheep or lamb or what have you. And then the poorer folks generally eat goat. Well, I never cared for lamb at all. I think it's a very gamey taste for me. It's very strong. It's a little bit of a pungent taste. So I just never been a fan of it. Downrange, I haven't been a fan of it here at restaurants. I've had it a handful of times. I love the goat though. I love the extra fat, whatever. But I was actually watching the movie 12 Strong. I know it's been out several years. It was the first time I've seen it from start to end. I've caught bits and pieces here and there, and you guys know the deal. We've been deployed over there enough that those type of movies, you don't even have to watch the whole movie to know what's going on, what's happening. You know the deal. You've been through it. So it's kind of just a depiction of our deployment. So I'd never watched the whole thing. I think it came out in like 2018 or something like that. So it's been out for at least 4 years or so. I finally sat down and watched from beginning to end. And I don't think it's PTSD or anything like that, but it takes you back to like when we were in and deployed. And you start thinking about stuff like, man, I really miss the food over there, because it's just not something that you find in a lot of restaurants. I mean, we can find it in a couple of Indian restaurants here, but very, very seldomly, even with those restaurants, you find goat. So it's like, hey man, I'm going to find me a halal store. Now, clearly inflation hit the halal store because that goat was not cheap. I could have gone and got some like Wagyu steaks or something, I think for pretty close the same price. But you're absolutely right. It's the store is in this crap hole part of town. It's the poorest part of the town that I went to. And I'm just like, man, you walk in there and there's no AC. It's hot. But you know what? I got my stuff. I fixed the meal, shot you guys the pics. And for a brief moment in time there, I felt like I was back in Afghanistan eating our Friday goat. So,
I mean, yeah, the goat. Yeah, it is a unique thing, and that makes sense. I didn't know why you were doing it. I thought, is this one of Roger's? Because Roger, I think we covered this last episode. Yeah, we did. Roger has I wouldn't call it a strict diet, but it's disciplined. It's a very disciplined diet, and it's paid off for him. And I was like, is this part of his new discipline
so
thing?
that was the old Roger. The new Roger has gone trash can diet for at least the last 2 weeks. Because, dude, when you're traveling, so I just got back. The last recording we did, I was obviously in a hotel, and I just got back. And you just cannot eat healthy when you're on the road. If you don't have access to, I mean, I guess you can do salads and stuff like that every day. But when you look at convenience, and I don't know, maybe I should open up a fast food chain like this. Probably wouldn't make enough money, which is probably why there aren't any out there. But you just can't do it. I mean, the best you can hope for is like a Popeyes chicken sandwich, because it's chicken, though it's fried. I guess Josh would do his Chick-fil-A or whatever, but that or a salads to go, man, that's all you can do. That's your options. And you can't do that every day. So it's like, hey, when you're on the road, you just kind of do the best you can. But when you go to McDonald's or you go to Burger King, I don't know if there is a best you can. It's all just, it's all junk. But to Josh's thing with the wallet, man, that dude is a much better man than me, because I'd have damn sure taken all the cash and thrown your wallet in the front yard.
Yeah, no, man. Like I said, I grabbed all the cash in my wallet and gave it to him. I was just like, I was stunned there for a second, because it was like, I didn't notice it was gone. But I mean, I don't, I'm at home, so I don't, use my wallet every day. And didn't even notice that it was
So
gone.
you are married. So when you say all the cash, that was like what, $4?
That was like $7. Yeah. So no, man, I had some in there. But yeah, it was good, and especially for people like me, a little bit of just a little bit of a curmudgeon. It was good, to as a reminder that there are good people out there. Not everybody's not everybody's a complete douchebag. This dude, he was a good person. And yeah, no, it
Well,
was good. I'm still not going to hear the end of it, but
well, yeah, because you just ruined that karma. Kids are always losing stuff, and it's going to take, I mean, minimum a few months for them to lose something, and then you can't really say anything. Well, you lost your wallet. And then you'll have to wait for them to lose something else, and it's that
I
karma.
know. I know, and they're already on the bandwagon. When we were eating dinner, I said, I said something. It was along those lines, and it was something like, okay, well, all right, make sure you get this done, or like that. And they were like, well, make sure you keep up with your wallet. And I was like, God, it's like these savages, man.
So here's
Like,
my good news story. You guys had some good news stories. Roger had some goat. Josh, some dude found his wallet. So I don't know if we covered this on the podcast, but one of the houses, one of my many properties in Texas got broken into. Oh, sorry. One of my mini properties got broken into in Texas, and they stole just a bunch of stuff. And it was all my son's stuff. It's all electronic stuff that college kids have. So I was like, you know what? It's your stuff. You're going to have to, put together the list of stuff. We have USAA for insurance. They're not paying this podcast nothing. So they should be after this plug. But so he put together a very thorough list of everything. He went back into his pictures and iCloud and everything and found where we had given him this for Christmas, or he had picked up that. He had like say a bicycle stolen. He found a picture of himself on a bicycle. He took pictures of the house and where they broke the window and all that stuff. But I was like skeptical. Whenever insurance is involved, I'm always skeptical. They're not going to give full value, this and that. And so sure enough, man, they came out with a settlement, and it was above what we claimed. It was like $1,000 above what we claimed. So man, they plugged that stuff in to some kind of list. I'm sure they used the adjusters, and it came up with the actual value. And we actually underestimated what all of it was worth. So that's a little bit of good news. But the issue comes into play where it's like, well, we got this huge settlement. We bought all that stuff for him to begin with.
Heck yeah, that's your money.
But he's handling it well. We all learn, when we moved. You guys haven't moved for a while, but when you move, or even if you're moving stuff around in your house, you're like, man, I just have too much stuff. I have too much stuff. And that's what he's realizing, making out that list, is how much stuff he had. He's like, you know what? I'm not gonna rebuy all that stuff. I'm gonna cut down. I don't need 2 sets of headphones, just need one. And I'm going to, he's like, I need to spend some money on that car to make sure it's running for the next few years. So yeah, the good news is he's turning into an adult, and USA, at least on renter's insurance, belongings claims, at least they came through. So yeah, I mean, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Whenever good news comes, bad news next, right, Josh? Hurricane.
Right.
I'm sure your boy's like, Dad, how much money did we get? We didn't get anything. I got
Luke straight deboed. My money, punk. No, that's good though, because it is good. I tell you, USA should pay us because they need a win. USA needs a win. They need some positive news. Like most military and ex-military folks, a lot of our stuff, USAA, and man, I tell you, it's probably in the last like 5 years they started going downhill. Before that, and then like the last 4 or 5 years, like they just went straight off the cliff. Like it was a gradual downhill, and then they just hit a cliff and went down when it came to everything. Like everything, rates. There, we just had our oldest has been driving for about a year. So she's on our insurance, and for all those who are like, oh well, it's more expensive to put boys on your insurance than girls. Well, I can tell you that it is not. It is very expensive, and it's about the same. And we're getting ready to add another. As our middle daughter gets ready to get her license, and it's like, man, their rates are not what they used to be, and their customer service is dog shit. Like it's terrible. You used to be able to call them, say, hey, I got a problem, no, and it would get fixed. It would be fixed, and generally it got fixed while you were on the phone with them. Very little wait times, everything. Now, dude, you might be on hold for an hour, and then you get somebody who is just, maybe they're not having the best day. Maybe they lost their wallet and nobody brought it back to them. Maybe they didn't get goat or tacos out of the back of a trunk, of a car. They're not having a bad day, and they want you to not have a good day either. And it's just, they've really gone downhill. And if it wouldn't be such a colossal pain, we would leave them far behind. But yeah, now they need a win. So USAA, if you're listening, you pay us and we'll keep plugging you. How about that?
Yeah, we used to, and we were the same boat. We used to have USA. We had it for about 15 years. And before, I didn't mind paying the premium. Everybody pays a premium, but you paid a little bit extra USA because when you called, kind of like with Luke's experience, you called, you got somebody that's fairly receptive on the other end. They took your stuff, they handled it. There's not a lot of going back and forth. And I think for them, it makes sense, especially when you talk about that amount, when they look at the amount of money they would spend going back and forth with you, the manpower, the phone calls, the emails. At the end of the day, especially if it's within a certain threshold, it's just cheaper for everybody to like, look, go ahead and give them $1,000. Do we want the call center to handle another 5 calls from Luke and an hour apiece and correspondence back and forth? So there was some threshold there, but then they started getting to the point where the premiums were just outrageous and it didn't make sense. And as Josh is about to find out, there was a time when I had 3 kids on insurance at one time. That was not fun. And finally, my oldest was getting ready to move out. And I called them and I was like, hey, I need to remove her from the insurance in the car because it was her name and this and that. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, she's your family member and she's on. So we start arguing back and forth. I'm like, she's not going to be living in my house anymore. The car is not my car. He's like, well, you have to apply to get it removed. I'm like, well, how about I just stop paying? So then we get in this pissing contest over me removing a vehicle from my insurance policy. And here's what pisses me off about this whole thing. It's just like the airlines, right? They talk about people get unruly when they drink alcohol. Well, okay, that's part of it. But the other part is that all of us pay a stupid amount of money for a service. Like I'm paying for this. They work for me at this time. They work for us. And sometimes, most of the time, you don't even use them. So then you're just taking my money. But the guy, we end up going back and forth. And so finally, I hit that breaking point that Josh is talking about, that it's just it's a lot of hassle to move. I hit that breaking point. I'm like, you know what? Tell you what, don't just remove her car, remove them all. Remove my house, remove everybody. I called Geico, went straight over. Like, here's my stuff. I'm like, I don't care what you got to do, just do it. And Geico ended up being cheaper anyway. And I will say overall, the today's service, today's USA service, or I guess it's been a couple years ago, but it's very, comparable. It's about equal. Now, when I looked at what USA was 10, 15 years ago, they were awesome. I had a break in with a vehicle once and they were badass. I mean, very receptive, took care of my stuff, much like yours. I had this crappy Sony Explode stereo and it cost like $199, right? It was like the CD player and you get the speakers and the box and this and that. And anyway, long story short, the guy's like, hey, so yeah, we don't sell that crap, but I can go get you a, Rockford Fosgate. And I was like, hey, man, this is better than what I had in there to begin with. So that's kind of why I stuck around with them. But when you get down to the customer service and you look at the amount that we're paying, that's my problem with it, and it goes back to the airline thing. It's like you pay a stupid amount of money. Every one of our listeners do. I mean, Josh, God forbid, man, once you get to 3 kids, I mean, like one of them needs to ride a bicycle. It's insane. You'll probably come just under what Luke pays, for his multiple mortgages on all of his houses.
On all my properties, dude.
Slumlord.
So I put a message in the chat here. I looked at the headline. It said, for those of you who may not know, Russia granted Edward Snowden Russian citizenship, which is good for him. Why anybody want to be a citizen of Russia? I guess you can ask Steven Seagal. But the headline is, Russian citizenship means Snowden may well be conscripted to fight in Ukraine. State Department. Dude.
Hilarious.
Okay. Has it ever really paid off for a Soviet or Russian spy? I mean, when they get back, if they ever do defect, they get treated like garbage, man. They really do. They get a lifetime of surveillance. You get put up in one of these, giant high-rise apartments. They tell you when you can come and go. I think Kim Philby in his later days, that old spy from MI5, I think they let him go out for groceries toward the end of his life. But it's like, man, he was basically just a prisoner. It's like Snowden. I mean, that would be the perfect thing. You want to support Mother Russia. You're going to go fight in Ukraine. I mean, what must be going through his head? I think the guy obviously is a traitor, but man, I mean, that's just desserts right there. You gave away the family jewels, and he gave it to everybody, but Russia took him in. He decided to take their hand and go with that. And, I mean, come on. You want to call the U.S. a corrupt regime, Snowden, and all this stuff? Look what Russia's doing. I mean, that's just desserts, man. You reap what you sow. You totally reap what you sow. Speaking of reap what you sow, we can talk about college football here in a minute. But Josh, any thoughts on Snowden maybe going to fight in Ukraine?
I hope he does get drafted, and I hope he catches a JDam right in the face. Um, I I see you see it from time to time on on Twitter, where people are like, we should pardon Assange, and they always lump Snowden in there with him, right? And it irks the ever loving shit out of me, to see people actually think that Snowden was a hero. Like it drives me absolutely nuts to to see that. Snowden was a traitor. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Um, and that's that. So, but you're right. How they treat him, man. I can't remember this dude's name. Um, but he was one of the, it was 85, the year of the spy. He was a CIA case officer who got recruited by the Soviets. Um, and he was supposed to go to Moscow Station as his very first posting, which is back in the 80s, like that was unheard of, and it wasn't something that was normally done. So this guy, before he got to before he punched out across the pond, he got briefed onto all Moscow Station's operations and everything like that. And then the guy shows up, he basically he defects, he shows up at the Soviet embassy in Helsinki after the FBI was sitting on his house for days. And they never got him leaving. And but and then he was there for a couple years, and then I think it was the early 90s, maybe the mid 90s, they found him with a broken neck in his in his little apartment, and they were like, oh, he fell off a ladder, or something. And it was like, no, he just he reached the end of his usefulness. And the Russians went ahead and took care of that for us. So yeah, man. Other than that, dude, Snowden, I hope he does. I hope he goes to Ukraine. I hope he gets shot in the face, because that dude deserves every bit of it. I'll let Roger give his opinion, and then yeah, man, so much going on in college football, especially from this past weekend. It's crazy.
Well, I think when you look at Snowden and Assange, two different balls of wax. Assange, you're legitimately looking at it from a journalism point of view. But I think he's also, and I haven't followed him lately as far as what's going on with the U.S., but I mean, he's got some sexual assault charges in there. I think it's either like sexual assault of a minor or a rape charge or something like that. And if I remember correctly, a lot of the stuff that the U.S. was going after him for was the sexual assaults. Granted, it's probably pretext for obviously what he did with Wikipedia and or not Wikipedia, but WikiLeaks and what have you. But at least from the journalism point of view, probably looks to be wrongly prosecuted from what we've seen or what I've seen. The rape stuff, I don't know enough about it to whether he's in the right or wrong or what have you. With Edward Snowden, let me ask you this, Luke. So with him becoming a Russian citizen, I'm assuming he gives up his U.S. citizenship if he hasn't already. Does that open up his freedom of movement? I mean, what happens from, let's say, as a tourist, Russian citizen, not a U.S. citizen anymore, and he wants to travel abroad? Do we still have the extradition rights to try to arrest him? Or if he goes to a country where we have reciprocity, where they say, hey, let's roll him up, hey, Interpol, let's roll him up and send him back to the States? Or is he pretty much free and clear?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, if he's still a U.S. citizen, I don't know how that works. We had this discussion one time, and I think I was wrong about it. My thoughts on U.S. citizenship and what it takes and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if we had extradition, it wouldn't matter if he was Russian or Mexican or whatever. If he decided to go to Italy as a Russian citizen, I don't know if if Italy requires Russians to have visas to come in, probably. But if he applied for, first of all, they're not going to grant him a visa. But if they did, and he showed up to Italy and the U.S. knew he was going there, that dude's coming home. Well, or what
Oh
home
yeah,
used to be.
there's some extraordinary
Yeah.
rendition happening.
But like Egypt, for instance, I think with Egypt, you don't have to have a visa from Russia. It's Egypt, Thailand. There's a few. Mexico, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm talking out of my depth now, but I would think that his freedom of movement is going to be probably even more restrictive because, if Russia's like, well, they want to get us back for Brittany Griner, for doing that to her, which I haven't heard her name mentioned in the news lately. Free Brittany. I guess that's going to, I mean, the Ukraine flags lasted longer than I thought they would, but the Free Brittany stuff, I don't think Russia would want to put itself in a position where they would have to defend one of their own citizens getting, that extraordinary rendition back to wherever they would send Snowden. But that's a good question. I just I find it hard to believe that Russia's not controlling his every waking moment at any given time.
Well, surely he's working for them, right?
Oh yeah,
Surely
it's
he's
got to
doing
be.
what he did for the U.S. And I think that's part of the problem. Not just how it all happened, but he sold state secrets. He aired it all out. But then you go to Russia, of all places, right? Oh, the freedoms in the U.S. and surveillance state and this and that, and it's like, so of all your complaints, all the issues you have with our country, you go to Russia of all places. Dude, it's unbelievable.
I guess he was confident that Russia would hold on to him. I guess he could have gone to China, maybe, but Chinese are kind of weird about that stuff. Uh, yeah, that dude. Like you said, there is a marked difference between Assange and Snowden for sure. Uh, I don't know. We've discussed this on the show before a while back, but I'm not aware that because everyone wants to say, Josh saying drives people crazy when they say he's a hero. And the reason people like Tim Pool or Michael Malice will say he's a hero, Snowden, is because he exposed some stuff the NSA was doing that was a little questionable in a lot of people's minds. A lot of people did not know or understand exactly what the NSA was doing and had been doing for a very long time. And he exposed that, pulled back the curtain, and I don't think much been done about that, but he did expose some of those practices. So, your left leaning or anarchist type journalists like Michael Malice would be like, yeah, of course he's a hero. The problem is there's a right and a wrong way to do that, right, Josh? I mean, I'm not aware that he tried to even go through the whistleblowing process at all. Again, I think there is a right way something like that can be done while still protecting, some sensitive methods and means that we use.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and I do, I recall something from the very beginning on, when he apparently he addressed it within his organization, right? And of course, within his organization, he was working up there at the nerdery. They were automatically like, shut up, go back to your office and shut up. And then he was like, oh, okay, well, and then he just decided to data dump a bunch of stuff. And so he didn't, for folks who maybe aren't overly familiar with it, there are whistleblowing channels for your regular run of the mill unclassified information, and then there are whistleblowing channels for your super secret squirrel information as well. And there's even I mean, you have the HIPSI and the SISI, these intel committees that are inside Congress that you like their contact information is not hard to find, and you can email any congressman that sits on that committee, one of those committees, and it's like, hey, here you go. To get your grievances heard if you feel that strongly about it. What you don't do is go and hand that stuff to our adversaries, because there were some very sensitive methods and means that were exposed. And then even seeing some of the information that came out in that, some of it had nothing to do with his organization and what he did and what he had a grievance against. Some of it was just it was kind of like the Bradley Manning thing. It was just a bunch of random, highly classified, sensitive information that had nothing to do with his grievance and what was going on and what the NSA was doing. And I agree. The NSA was doing they were doing some things, and they probably still are doing some things that aren't congruent with the Constitution and our values. But people allowed them to do that when they allowed the Patriot Act to be passed. And the court, we've talked about it a little bit before, and we always go back and forth on it, in our offline text, about what people are willing to give up, when they're scared. If anybody's still got a question on that after the last 2 years, I don't know what to tell you. Um,
First of all, you dead named someone, so I hope this video doesn't get demonetized, and even if it does, we won't lose anything. So it's Chelsea Manning. Um, but do you guys remember, I guess, what year was that? You guys were still in, where they changed 381-10 on retention and all that stuff. So what they changed, you remember this? You remember when they changed it? It's kind of a big deal, and it kind of shocked me because I read through it, and I'm no lawyer, obviously. But basically, they changed it to where I wish I had it open right in front of me now. But basically, it says retention, retaining information on U.S. persons. It's like, well, if it's all ones and zeros, if it's all positive and negative charges that no one has looked at or put through something that would translate it to speech or whatever, it's not necessarily retention. Now, obviously, the regulation doesn't read like that, but that's the point. It's like, well, if it's just ones and zeros, if it's just data that cannot be extrapolated from with human eyes without some kind of program, to extrapolate that info, it's not retention. Do you guys remember that? I'm tempted to pull up 381.10 and read it right now.
so I just texted everybody the link to the PDF. Yeah, I remember that. It was they redid it. It was like 2010ish, 2007, 2010, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
When they redid it, and I remember, I remember that piece, and of course there's some angst there because it's all, it's all semantics and stuff. It's like, okay, well, since this is a ones and zeros, and you may not have the gonculator, that you require it for you to be able to read what this information is, then we can keep it because it's not retention. And you're like, okay, well, that's BS because it is, because you still have that data and you're still retaining it. It's it's absolute crap. But people, and I say people meaning the government continues to do things like this, and the government continues to get away with things like this. And I can't tell you how many FOIA requests I've seen, come in, in various organizations at various levels and stuff. And, the reasoning that people come up with to avoid answering that for you, right? So it's like, oh no, well, we can, we just need to word the response like this, and then we can nest it under, one of these exemptions to where it's not, you people can't FOIA it. It's absolutely crazy. It's like the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police are not susceptible to the Freedom of Information Act. And they are still pushing to open up a Capitol Police office in every single state.
That's insane.
That is absolutely crazy. Yeah,
well, do you think, Roger, that when they changed that, my first thought, well, one of my first thoughts was, well, they might have just exposed the capability by changing that rule and putting it in an unclassified format like that. And that's part A to my question. Do you agree or disagree with that? And part B is, it's not really a question, it's kind of a point. It's like, this is one of the reasons that a lot of your people like me are against the National Gun Registry. Because it's like, well, Luke, what are you worried about a National Gun Registry for? What are you worried about that? Nobody's after you. And my thing is, well, yet. No one's after me yet. But, if there's this registry, or if there's this data out there that can't be, can't put it through the gonculator, it's still out there. So if all of a sudden you're determined, you're determined to be an enemy of the state or a threat to whatever because you're a white supremacist or whatever it is, boy, they can, total false accusations. You just get the gonculator on that stuff that hasn't been retained, and bam, there you go.
Yeah, and it actually comes down to intent. Why do you want to keep it? Why do you want a national registry? And I found the piece that you're talking about here. So basically, it says, and what we're talking about here is intelligence oversight. So specifically for us with 381.10, it's the Army's ability to collect, process, retain, disseminate information on U.S. persons. Going back to the McCarthy years and this and that, you just can't take government people and say, hey, we're going to target U.S. people and we're just going to collect whatever we want. We're going to do it however we want. And we're going to keep the info for as long as we want. And this is actually interesting because I don't think I don't remember reading this closely at the time, but basically it states U.S. person information, intelligence files, databases, repositories is retained in accordance with the disposition criteria. Basically, you got to follow some other rules. U.S. person information deleted from user electronic files, but remaining on servers, and check this out, or archived files, which to me is retaining, may remain until systems administrators purge or retire them in accordance with systems maintenance policies. So what that tells me, because normally there's 90 days. So for the listeners out there, you generally speaking, and Josh, you're probably smarter on this than I am with it, but generally speaking, you come across some information, you generally have 90 days to find out, hey, this was collected properly, we can retain it in accordance with the federal regulations, and we can process it, disseminate it, whatever. If after 90 days, it doesn't meet any of that criteria, you have to get rid of it. Well, when they talk about archive, that to me is retention. You're retaining the information, and that is retrievable. But it goes back to what I started off with. It's like, well, why do you want it? Why would you want it? Why do you want to retain this? You want to retain it because you have an intent to use it. You want the historical data so that somewhere down the road you find some laws being broken, or you find some reason that you can go after. But you're watching it play out with Trump right now. Right, wrong, and different, whatever he did. I mean, none of us were on the inside. You talk about the documents and just everything. Right now, there are no charges that are sticking to him. But what do? They just keep peeling that in. How much other stuff can we find? How much? Let's go through the text of Mark Meadows. How much other stuff can we find? That's why they want the retention of it, right? It's not an oversight piece where, hey, we can make sure that they're operating in accordance with the law, federal regulations, what have you. Most of these folks want to retain that information because they're probably going to target you down the road. When you look at a national gun registry, why else would you do that? There's no other reason that you would keep that information. So it goes back to what the FBI is going through, or what they've gone through, and a piece of it, I think they lied again on another FISA just recently. But where they sit there and they go to a judge and they say, hey, these are the reasons that we have for spying on a U.S. citizen. And when they lie about that, and the judge is not privy to any of that, right? The judge takes it at face value that the Department of Justice and the FBI are presenting factual information. The judge takes that information and says, okay, yeah, there's probable cause here because you've got some foreign nexus connection, and we're going to allow you to take some investigative activities or surveillance activities to find out what's going on. Problem is the FBI lies about it, right? To do that.
Nope.
Or they have lied about it. What's up, Josh?
No, I was just agreeing with you. I think it should be, when it comes to spying, when it comes to investigating U.S. citizen, especially when it comes to, levying, the FISA courts and the powers that that they can bring to bear. It should be as hard to do as as it is to amend the Constitution. Truly, like it should be such a difficult, painful process that the only people, the only time you're willing to undergo that process is when for sure, right? When hey, like this is a legitimate threat, like this is, and we have a legitimate case, and there should be so many checks and balances in there. And the first, we kind of we kind of talked about this a couple of episodes ago. If I were king, not president, but if I were king in a a Josh administration, lawyers like Kleinsmith, you would never receive your law license back. You would never, be able to practice law ever again because you would be in jail for the rest of your natural life. You know, if you falsified a FISA, which in turn, allowed a federal law enforcement agency with intelligence collection intelligence authorities as well, to spy on U.S. citizens, you would go to jail forever. It's just it, there has to be, there has to that pendulum's got to swing back the other way at some point. And we have to stop giving carte blanche to the government, and we have to stop putting these agencies on a pedestal, and be like, oh well, the FBI and whoever else. We have to, I mean, be like, hey, these organizations are filled with people, right? And people are fallible. And we have to stop, well, I mean, would the FBI ever lie to you? No, they would never do that, But if you go back and you take a look, and it's like, oh, the same FBI that, spied on Martin Luther King Jr., that FBI, yeah. You start talking about the CIA and people are like, oh, well, the CIA would never do it. It's like, yeah, the Tuskegee experiment. Yeah. You mean that agency? Um, you know, testing LSD unknowingly, testing LSD on, service members, back in the 50s and stuff. Yeah, them folks, yeah, they would never do anything wrong, right? Um
What was the name of
and
the op where they were going to blow a plane out of the sky to predicate a war on Cuba, and Kennedy shut that down? Do you remember? Do you know the name
oh,
of that op? I can't
I
remember it.
I can't
Yeah,
know.
the same guys though. The same guys.
Yeah.
We're going to shoot like a civilian passenger jet out of the air and say that Cuba did it so that we would, it would be an impetus for a war on Cuba. Unbelievable.
Oh, Northwoods.
Northwoods, yeah.
Yeah. Like and people and then people turn around and they're like, no, they these other little things like Russian collusion and in elections and stuff like that. They're like, no, nobody would ever do that. And it's like, really? These guys were literally going to blow an airliner out of the sky and kill you know innocent people just so they could go a war on Cuba, and then well, the Bay of Pigs and all that. It was that was just a hot mess. But it was good though, because I mean, once Cubans rose up in protest last year, and took to the streets in earnest, more than we've ever seen in our lifetime anyway. The CIA was able to, capitalize on that, and we overthrew the communist government of Cuba, and now Cuba is oh wait, never mind. Yeah, that didn't happen. Sorry.
How long have they had to work on that problem set number one,
Right.
which is which is going down a better road of the other problem set in the 1970s called Iran. So
Yeah.
what's going on, Roger? You tracking Iran at all? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, so basically, you have an uprising, and what's important is much like during the Barry years, we talked about this on an early episode. This is like deja vu because remember, I forget what year it was under Barry when they had the uprising for several weeks, and I'm sitting here. We were on mission. I think Josh and I were on mission somewhere, and I remember watching on Fox News. I was like, wow, the Iranian government's getting ready to be overthrown. I mean, it was a pimple just waiting to be popped. And I'm like, surely our folks on the ground are ready to rock and roll in this thing, right? Because again, we've had since the 70s, late 70s to plan this out. And I'm just waiting, and you're just waiting. You're like, sure, any day now, any day now. And then it just kind of goes away. And so now in Iran, you have Masha Amini, and I think it was the headscarf, right? She I forget the name of it, but
hijab.
hijab, that she's not wearing it. And anyway, so they arrest her, they punish her, the morality police arrest her, they put her in prison, what have you. And long story short, it's pissed off a lot of people. Now, this isn't the first time it's happened, but when you talk about this scale of protests and demonstrations, you've got women out there burning theirs, they're cutting their hair. They're basically breaking all the laws, all the morality laws that the Iranians have in place. What's important is we're not talking about a U.S. led uprising. At least what we know, right? Out in the open, what we see on the news. I don't, it's always tough because we're all government workers. So you're like, government, U.S. government, or U.S. government isn't smart enough to plan something like this. And maybe they'll surprise me, and they did have something to do with it. But the outcome always tells me that no, they didn't. Just like with the last one. But you have a grassroots uprising that again seems to be primed to pop that pimple. And you're waiting for the U.S. We're day 14 now, day 13, day 14. It's not even on the news. Like even with Fox News, CNN, I haven't seen anything on MSNBC. I think Fox News ran like a 45-second. This is kind of what's going on in Iran right now. Bloop. CNN, same thing, about 30 seconds. Haven't seen anything on MSNBC, and I'm like, how is this not on the world stage right now? I mean, I know why it's not, because we're sending, by the way, we just approved another $12 billion to Ukraine. But it's like, how is this? Surely we have some intelligence organizations that are out there ready to break in, in case of glass and overthrow the Iranian regime, right? But it's not going to happen. I put it this way: I'll be shocked if it happens. And when that happens, that tells me that, well, then obviously we didn't have anything to do with the uprising. And again, it's another failed attempt to where, and I don't know if democracy is the right thing for Iran. I think we've talked about this before, where, hey, democracy is not right for everybody. Same thing with Cuba, but it's definitely better than what they have now. Just from the human rights point of view, it is. Just when you look at the national security threat point of view, something else is going to be different or be better than what they have now, especially when the Iranians enrich all their uranium and have nuclear weapons, if they don't already have them. So Luke, I don't know what and I'll again, not trying to be, we always say we don't want to be political, because we would say the same thing if it was a GOP, Republican, whatever. But when do people start noticing patterns and trends? Like, hey, this stuff only seems to happen under one type of party. When you look at what's going on with Ukraine, I mean, it's that cognitive dissonance that you talk about. It's like, dude, they literally took Crimea under Obama. They shot down a commercial airliner, right? Nothing happened. Nothing happens during the Trump years. And again, you could say good, bad, indifferent, whatever. All I know is what we saw in the 4 years. And then Joe comes into office and they're right back. Dude, there's some causation there. There's some correlation there. There's a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely correlation. No doubt. Here's why I don't think that the latest mass protests in Iran, and it's like Josh wrote, the young lady died after she was arrested for not wearing her hijab, and because the cops basically beat her to death. So people are upset about that. Now, here's why I don't think personally this is any kind of CIA op, because basically, if no one's noticed, for the past couple of years, the Biden administration has really wanted to get another Iran nuclear deal done. So they've been kind of really appeasing the Iranians and trying really not to rock the boat or ruffle any feathers over there. So yeah, I really don't think this was a sanctioned op, for the reasons you said, Roger, and just for that, I don't think that the Biden administration wants to ruffle any feathers over there, which is absolutely the wrong move, in my opinion. The Iranian people, I mean, based on what I know about the Persian culture in particular, is Persians are not Arabs. For those of you who don't know, there's a marked difference between a Persian and an Arab, and Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, you go over into Iraq, I would say is it's predominantly Arab, even if they call themselves Shiite. They're not really Persian. But if you go back and look at history, Persians have had a lot in common, at least in the 19th century and the 20th, up until the Khomeini took charge. They have a lot in common with Western values. They assimilate well with Western culture. Just historically, they have. Do they now? I don't know. They've been under the thumb for a long time, but a lot of historians will tell you that, well, if Iran was our ally, like back when it was when the Shah was in charge and before that, boy, they are a really good ally, because they understand the Western mindset a little bit more than Arabs purportedly do. I haven't worked with a whole lot of Persians, but a good portion of the population in Afghanistan are Persian. Tajiks are Persian. They consider themselves Persian, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody or anything, but I don't know what your experience was, Josh, but my experience working with Tajiks was a little bit better than my experience working with Pashtuns, and that could be my fault, because I'm Western and I don't understand their ways, and I'm not saying it's their fault. I just had an easier time getting along with that particular demographic than the other. And a little bit the same in Iraq. And get your thoughts on this. I may be straying a little far from the subject, but I got along with Kurds much better than I got along with Arabs. I shouldn't say got along. Easier to work with. Put it to you that way. Easier to work with. And, I would say Arab Christians as well were a lot easier to work with than Arab Muslims. Now that's anecdotal, and I'm not trying to, get canceled or anything. I'm just saying my own anecdotal experience. So now that I've walked out on the plank, Josh, I'm going to drag you out with me. What was that your experience too, or
Uh,
or am I just completely off base?
no, I'll say for Iraq, the Kurds were absolutely 100% easier to deal with, than Sunni or Shia, Arabs. And I think part of that is, when you talk to when you sat down with a Kurd, um, I didn't get a history lesson every time, right? That started, in 100 AD. Um, you know, I did every Sunni and every Shia I sat down with. Like it was okay. You're getting the history lesson. It reminded me of dealing with the Albanians, in Kosovo. Every time we sat down, it was like, man, it's like people would be like, well, how long do you think this meeting's going to last? It was like, it depends on where we start off in the history lesson to begin with,
Are
right?
we are we starting at Kosovo Polja, or are we
Yeah,
starting with Milosevic?
yeah, exactly. Or are we starting with Alexander the Great? Right, I don't know where I don't know where that starting line is, but that's gonna dictate the length of that meet, right? And it was, but I never got that. I never got that with the Kurds. And I think the Kurds, I think their value. I don't want to say their maybe their values. Maybe values is the wrong word, but I think their kind of view on the world and their view of them as a population, um, was, hey, I need to get you, this information because I need you to go, take care of the people who are, actively trying to end us. And that was definitely the case, in the post, ISIS years. As far as Afghanistan goes, I think it was definitely easier dealing with Tajiks, and I would even say, Hazaras, than it was dealing with the Pashtuns. Again, every Pashtun I dealt with, I got a history lesson, and then every Pashtun I dealt with was super angry. Like they were just like super angry people. Hazars were, you're trying to think back, and most of the Hazars that I remember that I dealt with, like they were for the most part, they were pretty chill dudes. Um, and the same thing with the Tajiks. The Tajiks, from time to time, you would get a little bit, you get a little bit of a history, lesson from them. But by and large, man, that was all Pashtuns. And the Pashtuns, when you look at the folks in Afghanistan, minus, I'd say minus the foreign fighters, talking really, the ethnicities that really make up Afghanistan, not talking about Chechens or the Arabs that came into Afghanistan to get their jihad on. The Tajiks and the Hazars are probably the most easygoing, easier to deal with. By and large, again, like anecdotal. And I know, yeah, we strayed, man, we strayed way off the Iran conversation. Um, but you go back and you look at Iran, kind of taking it circling back here. You take a look at Iran. I think you're right. The Persians, their values line up with the West, a little bit better, than most. And you look even prior to the 1979 revolution, where they tossed out the Shah. The one prior to that put him in power. What that was early 50s, right? It was like 52, 53. And basically we we stoked that one, to put the Shah in power. But by and large, even before that, by and large, like there were no hijabs. It was like Afghanistan, prior to the late 70s. There were no hijabs. It was straight Western culture, Western dress. They were up and coming countries. Um, uh,
But
uh,
but in the 19, I think it was 1940s, this German dude with a real thin mustache showed up in Tehran, and he goes, "Hey, listen to this. Here's our plan to take care of the Jewish people. What do you think?" And the Iranians became best friends with Hitler from that point on. So they do have that mark on them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, they are not as they're not as pure as the driven snow. Um, but going, just talking about them as as Persians, you know, th- I think you know, they know how to be free. It's not like Iraq under, under Saddam. Iraqis, there's some good people there. But I'm telling you right now, Iraqis just didn't know how to be free. They could not do it. It was just impossible for them. So that's everybody's history lesson and current events lesson of what's going on. But
But you know what
it's
though?
just
It's the same thing. And circling back to the Iranian demonstrations and nuclear weapons. We talk about trends. You know what this sounds exactly like? Remember, there was another president. I do believe he was a Democrat. He liked cigars, and there was the agreed framework with North Korea. We are seeing this stuff played out the exact same ways. Hey, you know what? We're going to come to an agreement. You're just going to promise that you're going to stop your nuclear program. We're going to send some inspectors in there, and in return, we're going to normalize relations and just start sending you money, start sending you food. We'll start sending you alternative. I guess we can send them solar plants or some some electric vehicles or something like that to supplement their economy and their energy needs. I mean, Josh, at what point do people start realizing these trends and that, hey, man, it just doesn't work going down that route?
I don't I don't know. Um, Luke alluded to this, in the last episode that for us to take any other stance besides appeasement, you have to be willing to use a hammer. And right now, I don't think the American people are willing to do that. Now the previous president was not afraid to use that hammer, right? And he demonstrated that by turning, Qasim Soleimani into a bowl of salsa. Um, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, he's going to get us into World War III." And what did Iran do? Okay, yeah, they launched some missiles at a couple of our bases in Iraq. They told us that they were going to do it. We cleared it. We were basically cleared most folks out before it occurred. But he was not afraid to use that hammer. And it was like the '80s. There's a reason why Iran released the hostages in Tehran on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, because they were like, this dude is crazy and he's probably not going to be afraid to use that hammer, right? And there was, by and large, not a lot of people messed around during the '80s, large scale, like with Americans for the most part, right? I mean, you had the Beirut hostage situation with Terry Waite, and others, but by and large, man, people didn't mess around. And then with W, a lot of countries, they kind of stopped messing around for the most part because they were like, well, shit, man, who's this crazy ass going to invade next? After Iraq. So the world was on notice. That we had a hammer and we weren't afraid to use it. Now the world just doesn't take us seriously. And after 20 years in Afghanistan, and after a long protracted war in Iraq, man, I don't by and large the U.S. people do not have the stomach for another all out war, a slugfest. That I think something like Iran would bring us. But it doesn't have to be. That's the thing, though. It doesn't have to be. Trump demonstrated that by killing Soleimani. It's like, dude, you don't have to go invade a country. You can just swag some key figures here and there, because that is good enough to drive policy. When your 2IC turns into a smoking hole in the ground, that kind of gets into your decision making process, for the very near future. So, but yeah, to answer your question, man, I don't know. Maybe Luke's got a better answer.
No, I don't. That's it goes to the incompetence. It speaks to the incompetence of the quote unquote leadership and the quote unquote foreign policy decision makers that are educated at the Foreign Service Institute and told all these nonsense uh, fairy tales basically about how foreign policy should be run and how the road you should and shouldn't go down. And I can tell you right now, we've seen it firsthand. State Department, they don't even believe in walk softly and carry, or talk softly, whatever it is, and carry a big stick. They just believe walk and talk softly, and everyone will just be your friend if you're just nice to them. And their idea of getting tough is, summoning the ambassador and not even giving him or her a chewing out, and not even a stern talking to, but just bringing in that ambassador, whoever it is, and saying, hey, we're really upset, and you should probably tell your leadership, and that's it. It's just it's kid gloves. There's no iron fist in the glove. It's just it's ridiculous. It's I think it's always going to be like that. We're going to learn a few hard lessons. Maybe it'll sway back and forth a little bit. Uh, turning turning your two ICs into salsa like Josh likes to do, and yeah, Josh is absolutely right, and we say this quite often. Is I think we've said it on the podcast like 2 times before. We'll say it again. Civis Romanus Sum. It's like, I am a citizen of Rome. Do not touch me. And everybody knew if we touch this person, that is an act of war. That's an act of war because they're going to come and raise this village. They're going to levy taxes. And it was not just don't attack this person. It was keep them safe while they're here, because we don't want anything to happen to them to, reflect poorly upon, our town or province or whatever it was back then. It's in some parts of the world, you still have that. In some parts of the world, you still have it. It's well known that in some countries in the world that, a prominent American will show up that everybody knows that works for the government or something like that, and they'll be followed the entire time they're there. And they're not being followed to make sure that to spy on them. They're being followed because we want to make sure nothing happens to this person. And that'll happen in Southeast Asia quite a bit, Vietnam, Cambodia, so on and so forth. So yeah, Civis Romanus Sum. I mean, we'll never ever get back to that. Just now, y'all getting me worked up, man. Roger, you're not supposed to talk about globalist affairs, my friend. You're supposed to keep it domestic.
Well, no, I mean, I think when you look on the world stage, you're starting to see people are getting tired of it. And a lot of this comes from the COVID era, where uh, as more and more data comes out, it's all about control. It's all about power. It's the hypocrisy of both sides. People shut down schools. We've said it before. There was a time period there where the government was telling you what you had to wear, where you could go, who you could visit, how you could get there, what time you had to be home. They were doing that for years, and in some places they're still doing it. And I'll jump over to what happened in Italy. So the Italian prime minister, it looks like they've elected their first female prime minister, Giorgia Meloni. So she's from the Brothers of Italy party. And I don't know if you guys seen her video that's making her way around Twitter right now. It's about a minute and 30 seconds, but she's basically talking about the left, and this is now immediately the progressives and the liberals have all labeled her a fascist, because that's the popular word right now, right? Everybody's a fascist, and according to the left, anybody who is to the right of Karl Marx is a fascist. That's what it comes down to. So, we are for socialism, we are for communism, whatever, and anybody to the right is a fascist. And they're actually even, I know this is jumping around a little, but they're actually beating up on one of the Fox News anchors because he was saying, Hitler wasn't just a fascist; he was also a socialist. He was a Marxist. At the end of the day, when you talk about all those extremes, I mean, when you talk about like socialism and Marxism, it's not power to the people. It's a dictator. It's a leader. I am going to determine what's best for our people, and we're just going to take what we want when we want to, and we're going to control production, the inputs and outputs, right? But when you look at Giorgia Meloni, they're automatically labeling her as a fascist because, and when you look at the party, the Brothers of Italy, there are some roots there from that. But since then, and she's done it for years and years and years, she's come out like, hey, look, we're not fascist, this and that. But anyway, the point being, she had a line, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit. I just took some notes, but her rebuttal to everybody on the left was that, hey, all the progressives, and this is spot on here, what's happening in the US, all the progressives and the liberals are waging a war against national identity, religious identity, gender identity, and family identity. And they're spot on. They just want you to be a number. It's not male, female. It's parent one, parent two, birthing parent, chest feeding. No, sorry, man. They do that to desensitize and dehumanize individuals. And I never made this correlation. I have to get some thought to this, and I'll throw it over to Josh to get some of his opinions on what's going on in Italy. But it's she brought it up. I haven't had time to give it some thought, but she brought it up as making consumer slaves. And so she ties that in with, hey, removing all that identity, because what the left wants is they want consumer slaves and basically going to spoon feed you what you want, what you need, what you think you need, what you think you want, what we really want, right? That when you talk about a dictator, whether it's fascist, whatever you want to call it, it's I know what's best for you, and I'm going to feed you what you think you need, what you think you want. So I need some more time to process that. But I think when you look on the grand scale of the world stage, and I think Josh, you hit it on the head the other day talking about Sweden, people are getting tired of it. And when you look at American politics with the polls, I'll throw it over to Josh to get his thoughts on Italy, but I'm kind of curious on what your thoughts are on as we get closer and closer to the midterms. I believe you're starting to get larger and larger swaths that are just like, hey man, I'm tired of it. And you know what? You want to call me an extremist or whatever because I consider myself an American, because I consider myself a Christian, because I consider myself a man, because I have a mom, I have 3 kids. You want to consider me an extremist because of those identities or those characteristics about me in my life? Then by all means, go ahead and do it, because there's nothing else I'd rather be. Call it what you want. We saw this for years, and you hit on the head with the whole appeasement thing, because that started during the Barry years, and then they started getting rid of that identity where, hey, Trump, it was big time during Trump years, nationalism, right? Because a nationalism, they all automatically say Germany and Hitler. It's like, hey man, I'm an American, I'm proud to be an American. And what the left has done with those identity categories that we talked about is they want to demonize any of those. So if you find yourself in any one of those categories, well, you're on the wrong. You just got to be parent one.
No, you're absolutely right. When you sit down and look at it, and people, the left constantly wants to talk about how, well, we're not trying to seize production, so it's not communism, right? Because that's, they're going by that that definition. Um, but what they're doing is they're setting it up, right? They're doing all the things to tee that up, to set the conditions, and you talked about it. One of the biggest things that has contributed to almost every societal woe in the United States is the destruction of the nuclear family. And you could take damn near any problem in the United States, and you could tie it back to the destruction of the nuclear family. And I'm telling you right now, people don't like to hear it, but the Welfare Act, from the 1960s, that really started hastening the destruction of the nuclear family, because you basically you incentivized fatherless homes. Um, you know it's a war on family values. It's a war on on religion. Anybody who has read any anything that Marx has written, that Lenin has written, anything, knows that communism and religion are not congruent with each other, because communism is supposed to take you to this utopia of we're all the same, everybody's an equal, and it is it conflicts with your utopia of religion, which is heaven, or whatever version of heaven your religion, your chosen faith outlines. So when you look at it, it's very clear what's happening to people who actually read, and people who actually pay attention to what's going on. And Luke brings it up all the time, and we get into our heated our are heated debates in the in text and stuff, but it's a we're all frogs in a pot, and it's just it's going to take, it might take 10 years for that that water to go up a degree, but it's going up, right? And by the time we realize that it's too late, um it may be 15 years from now, it may be 20 years from now, it may be 30 years from now, but I guarantee you the country that we had, what we, that we knew, is gone, and it's never coming back. Our kids are never going to feel what it's like we, when we grew up in the 80s, right? Our kids are never going to experience that country. And it's sad. I honestly hadn't been paying any attention to Italy and their election at all, because I'm not a globalist like Roger. But no, I, I really hadn't. And then I laughed because the first thing when I heard today, they were like, "Yo, Italy elected their very first female prime minister." My first question was, "Well, how do they know?"
The
And people were like, "What
biologists.
do you?" Exactly. People were like, "Well, what do you mean?" I was like, "Well, how do they know? How do they know she's a female? Are they biologists? How Anyway, but that's where we're at, right? That's where we're at. I haven't listened to her speech. I'm not spun up enough to talk, intelligently on really a lot of things, but especially, Italian politics. But the whole nationalist, the whole nationalist thing, like, it's not a bad thing in the sense of, hey, you should be proud of your country. People should be proud of their country, wherever they come from, whatever country you come from. Like, there should be some sense of national pride. I mean, unless you're a communist, or unless you're maybe from China, you probably should be real proud of the CCP. But anyway, by and large, you should be proud of your country. You should say, hey man, I'm from there and that's my country, and I want it to be good, I want it to be the best, I want it to prosper. I want the good people in my country to prosper. And I'm going to put my country's needs first. That's not a bad thing. That is a very, very good thing, for people to do. But Roger, I think you're spot on with, if we take away your identity, you know we take away any sense of family, that you may have, any sense of being connected to something. We take away, we've talked about this before, we get rid of those things that, while Americans, we're all, we're different ethnicities, we come from different backgrounds, we come from different, socioeconomic, environments, but there were things that made us Americans, right? The anthem, the flag, that American exceptionalism, that the fact that we are the only country who no one sends us foreign aid. We send it to other people. Those were things that we could look at and say, hey, we are that, that bright shining beacon of the world. Well, if I teach you that the country is inherently bad, and the founding documents that it's founded upon are inherently bad, and all its institutions are inherently bad, and you are, you're just a human, you're a them, a they, a, whatever, you're not, a boy or girl, man, woman, whatever. Yeah, then it's very easy later to, after I've conditioned you for, 20 years, to, go ahead and just continue to subjugate you. And it just makes it a lot easier. So, yeah.
And what's going on in Italy is interesting. A lot of people don't understand the parliamentary system versus the system we have. It's a little bit different. In order for someone to get elected a prime minister, there has to be somewhat of a coalition. Usually in these European countries, there's 3 or more, usually more, up to 6 political parties that sit in parliament that are elected, kind of like our House of Representatives almost. And these parties, the way their laws are set up, you have to have a few of these parties who differ on many, many things. You have to have a few of them come together in a coalition to agree on a prime minister. And it's got to be a certain majority. I couldn't tell you what. It depends on the country. But I kind of do like the parliamentary system a little bit. It's not as good as ours, but people always talking about, well, we need more than 2 political parties. Well, then you better be ready for a parliament, especially if you're talking about more than 3, because you're going to have a lot of pissed off people, because somebody got 34% of the vote, so what I do like about the parliamentary system, I'm getting to Italy, I'm getting to Roger's Italy thing here, is that you have to set some of your differences aside and find common ground. And that requires a lot of politicking between the parties. And I mean, so there is compromise. And I don't think that, in the case of communism, I'm with Josh, there is no compromise. But on other things, man, dude, there's got to be some compromise at some point, or you're just going to get more and more polarized and nothing's going to get done. And the stuff that does get done, you're probably not going to like it, because the only stuff that gets done is shit that nobody wants. Kind of like the, what is it? It was the Inflation Reduction Act. Now it's the Green Energy Act. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. When I say nobody, I'm saying 90% of the American people. Nobody cares. So the thing with Italy, you're seeing it a little bit in Sweden as well, where you've got political parties in Italy and Sweden, I'm sure in other countries, that represent the interests of recently arrived migrants, as well as current migrant populations there. And whereas the left parties, your green parties in these countries, used to be able to count on their votes for things, they can't count on those votes anymore. Those votes may just abstain altogether. So you get some other votes from more center parties, and right-wing parties in Europe are not really right-wing parties. Okay. We would call them left of center, but they're considered super right over there. But these right-leaning parties in Europe are finding themselves with more power, because the political groups that are supporting the migrants are no longer siding with the left, the super left parties. So that's one of the reasons she got that coalition together to be prime minister. And the same thing happened in Sweden. What I'm saying is, man, the bottom line is a lot of people in these countries are feeling the backlash. A lot of politicians on the left are feeling the backlash of the migrant waves that have come in. We've said it on this show before. Anybody who thinks America is racist, I challenge you, go to almost any country in Europe. You will experience true racism. You will see it. It's pathetic. It's awful. And it's disgusting. It's grotesque. But man, there's a piper to be paid for, an ethnic Italian in a village in Caserta or whatever, who's seen a bunch of migrants come in. There's a piper to be paid there. So yeah, the Italy thing, I'd like to listen to that speech, Roger. I'll probably do that tonight. But one of the things you guys both hit on was the destruction of the institutions. I personally believe that the destruction is caused by two different things. One is just a natural cyclical progression of society and civilization. And the other is, some of it is engineered by the left, of course. But I lean more toward it's just a natural cyclical progression that causes the downfall of certain civilizations and societies. And I do believe that certain aspects of the left are capitalizing on that currently going on, like the destruction of the nuclear family, for instance. They're jumping on the bandwagon. And you guys touched on all these institutions that we're losing faith in. I mean, guys on the right, like us, who years and years ago were all for the FBI. And it's like, boy, if you can't trust the FBI, who can you trust? And now look at us. The three of us, man, it's like, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. The military, can't trust the senior military leadership. Are you kidding me? So on and so forth. I mean, just go down the line on the institutions that are just being dragged. And it's not a good thing. And Roger, I'm going to segue into something one of our listeners asked. He asked me this in a text message. Eric, I really wish you'd asked this on the Facebook page. But in fairness, I don't think Eric has a Facebook. So good on him. But Eric asked, I said, I appreciate him listening and everything. But, what do you, we always ask, what would you want us to talk about? And he asked a question. I bounced it off Roger and Josh, but it was 7:00 at Eastern Standard Time. So Josh had already been in bed for an hour and a half. And Roger responded. It's a good question. Eric basically said that he's heard us talk numerous times on the podcast, or at least a couple of us talk about the importance of voting. But his question is kind of, with that institution being eroded, there is fraud. You've got human beings counting pieces of paper. With the faith being shaken in the institution of elections and voting, Roger, how are we supposed to maintain that mindset that voting Each individual vote is actually important.
Yeah, it's a great Josh question because it seems like we always go back and forth with this. The, the way you fix that, and I am just as guilty. It's one of those things I keep saying in my mind. It's kind of like community service and charity work and this and that. You got to get involved, and you got to get involved at the local level. And to a lot of Josh's credit, as we go back and forth on text, talking about how we vote and this and that, you have to elect the right people. You have to put forth the right people with the right principles that are going to hold folks accountable. And we're not talking about the majority of rhinos in there. I'd probably even argue the majority of conservatives, because I've got, at least when you look at the Senate, there's probably maybe 10, maybe 10. Then I'm like, okay, these are true conservatives and doing what I think, not necessarily 100% what I agree with, because then at that point you're in a cult, but 95% of we're going to the same goals here. We had the same objective, just maybe a slightly different route of getting there. But you have to get involved. And you have to get involved. It goes back to we were talking about politics at the dinner table, where they say, don't talk about politics at the dinner table. No, that is the time to talk about politics. You should absolutely have that conversation at the dinner table, and it should be knocked down, drag out. Hey, this is what I think. This is what I feel. These are the facts that back up my argument. Not just, and I should say, probably get rid of the feeling part. It should be based on facts and results and data to some extent. But you have to get involved. You have to get involved in educating those around you. You have to get involved in whether it's campaigning for somebody on the local level. Because if you have somebody, especially on the local level, we've talked about it many times, where you have a lot more influence, and you have somebody who stands for the principles that you believe in, it's your job, and in my opinion, it's your duty to do what you can reasonably to get that individual elected. I know for myself, fortunately, we've got Andy Biggs out here, so he's pretty in line with what I believe and how I see things. But I fail to do that myself. And so it's not just about going to the ballot and going to the voting booth and punching the ticket. You need to get involved. And maybe it's something as small as putting a sign in the yard. For us, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we do is this podcast. I think we obviously all lean to the right, but I think we do a fair job of kind of bringing out all the information. And hey, I'm happy to say a Republican's wrong if a Republican is wrong. If you can show me that, believe me, there are a lot of Republicans that are wrong. Half of them, more than half of them, are garbage anyway. But you just have to get involved. You have to get involved at that local level, whether it be campaigning, whether it be working for the office, maybe even running yourself. We're starting to see a lot more veterans getting involved, and we see it on the left and the right, where you have military veterans that are running for office. That's another way to get involved. That's how you really do have to influence from the bottom up, and not just on the political side, but the influencing of other voters. I talk to my son about that all the time, because especially in his group at his, he gets an earshot full. I mean, you get probably the same thing with you guys at home. I mean, my kid probably knows more about politics or hears more about politics than he ever wants to. But he is the center of gravity for his social group. And it's like, hey, you influence these other folks. And it's not about brainwashing or even persuading. It's like, hey, here are the issues, because right now it should be pretty easy. I tweeted this morning, hey, what did everybody pay for gas this morning, for the work week? You pretty happy with that? Josh has been posting a couple of times, the 401k. You pretty happy with that? It's diving in. Hey, this is why the 401k is where it is. This is why we are where we're at economically. This is why we're where we're at fuel prices. So education, persuasion, influence, get involved at the lower levels, where I think some of us not necessarily disagree. I don't think we just go this far down the rabbit hole as we try to push Josh's buttons. Is you have that knockdown, drag out fight in the primaries. That's what it's there for. That's when I'll stand in the primaries. I'm 100% of my principles, and you better meet that 99.9% threshold. But once you get beyond the primaries and you get into the general election, you have to go with who's closer to what your ideals are. Because here's the reality of it. You may not like either of the candidates. One of the two is going to win, period. And it may be a 1%, this guy, gal's 1% better than the other person. Not that I would vote for a socialist or a communist or whatever. At that point, you may just write in. But the bottom line is somebody is going to win. So some reality has to set in that if the person is meeting the 96% threshold, in my opinion, that might be somebody I support. And I know I'm going a little bit off tangent, so I'll throw it over to Josh to get some of his thoughts. But just getting involved. You have to get involved at the local level. I don't do it enough. I want to do it. Not necessarily want to run for office, but it'd be nice to probably go to some of the town halls, maybe ask some of the tough questions, go out and campaign for somebody, maybe even volunteer some time. Maybe I'll look up Kerry Lake and go volunteer some time.
No, dude, I agree with 100% of everything you just said. People should absolutely get out there and vote party line when it comes to the general election. Yeah, you're wise beyond your years. Um,
Now I have to save
I
this
can't say
snippet.
that with a straight face.
I'm gonna have to save this and like take out the transcript, and I'm gonna make it into a plaque.
Yeah. No. So, growing up, we didn't talk. We talked a little bit about politics in my house, but not a lot. And there was a lot, especially our generation. Yeah, you had those conversations like, well, you don't talk about politics or religion, when it should have been, here's how you have a civil conversation about politics and religion, right? Um, and now, my family still doesn't necessarily talk a whole lot about politics. You know, because all of us are pretty much on the same sheet of music. For the most part, I got some extended family members out there who they had like a bad slice of pizza, and just kind of been left and never came back into the fold. But anyway, um, so I look at it as, when it comes to voting, and I used to, be that. I used to be like you and Luke are. It's like, you have to go vote, and you're voting for the 70% solution, over the the 68% solution. I don't think I'm gonna do that anymore. I'm definitely done with that, because I'm tired of incentivizing bad behavior. I'm done with it. It's like your kid. You're incentivizing bad behavior by doing that, by these folks. And I'm talking about the Crenshaws, the Romneys, these, use air quotes here for those not watching YouTube, those conservatives, that are so-called, that are out there. I'm not voting for them anymore. I'm done voting for them. I'm not going to the poll. And I've said it, and I'll say it here, on the record. In 2024, if the GOP is not named Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, or some dark horse candidate, that's going to come out of nowhere that we don't know about yet, that's in that same vein, I will not vote, because they're the same people. These people that you're voting for, the Mitt Romneys, and people were like, well, who's worse, man, Mitt Romney or Joe Biden? They're the same. It's the same person. And we get into this, and there's always some spirited debate back and forth across the text, is and we always talk about, I'll bring up Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. Anybody who thinks that Mehmet Oz is a conservative, a true conservative, you are fooling yourself. You are high AF. Put the mushrooms down and sober up, and step back and take a look. You think that guy's going to be better than John Fetterman? No, he just doesn't have. John McCain's cheek on the back of his neck. It's the same person. They're going to vote along the same lines. You think you think Oz isn't going to pull that handle for red flag laws? You think Oz isn't going to pull that handle for a national gun registry? You're crazy. He's going to do it. He's going to do it. He's no better than his Democratic challenger. And a lot of these GOPers are. If you're sitting there and tell me that Liz Cheney would be better than Joe Manchin, you're out of your mind. And you're gonna incentivize that bad behavior. Let's say Liz Cheney's the nominee, right? You're gonna incentivize her behavior up to this point, up to the day of the election, by going and casting a vote for her, just because, well, it's she's a little bit better than the other guy. You're crazy. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done with it. It'll be what it'll be, and eventually somebody will figure it out. And we may have, we all may be, living like we're, in Afghanistan when it happens, because the country's completely collapsed. But at some point, people have to stop, had better figure this out and stop supporting these shitty candidates. It's just that that's just all there is to it. And there it goes. I'm on the record, not doing it.
I I weep. I'll get into why I weep in a moment, but as usual, this should come to no surprise to anyone who's listened to 5 or more episodes. I'm a milquetoast fence sitter on this one. I fall right between the screen is split here between Roger and Josh. I'm looking at them and I fall right kind of in between there. A little bit more on Roger's side than Josh's, but with on Josh's side, there are Republican candidates I will not vote for. I will not do it. If Mitt Romney's up there, I will not cast my vote for Mitt Romney and whoever he chooses as his running mate. I won't do it. Can't do it. There's some others, I mean, it's a good one. Is Liz Cheney going to be any better than any Democrat? Cinema or Mansion? Absolutely not. The woman is the devil. She's a devil's spawn. It's like the Emperor in Star Wars' kid, which I heard is the hero or something. Whatever. Maybe that's a bad analogy. But I see where Roger's coming from too. It's like, if we sometimes just got to hold your nose and vote for that person, because otherwise, how do you get the Supreme Court the way it is? I think that some people held their nose and voted for Trump the first time around. And, that paid off for them. He wasn't in line with the way they saw things, especially, dyed in the wool, old school Reagan conservatives. How could you like Trump? He was a moderate Republican. All his stances, at least that he was running on, and his stances up to that point on Oprah or wherever else he went on, were extremely moderate. Now, he changed his tune while he was in, as all politicians do. But so I fall kind of in between on you guys on that one. There is a line that I will not cross with a few of these politicians. And believe it or not, Ted Cruz is one of those. Ted Cruz, I feel, lied to me personally, and I've told that story on here. He lied to everybody, but I felt like he was playing me in particular as a fool by making a promise and then breaking it in front of how many ever viewers there were at the RNC that year. So thinking that we would just look past that. And so, yeah, he's one of them. Do I think Ted Cruz will be a good president? Yeah, probably, but I'm not going to vote for him. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's my inner Josh coming out. But I weep because we place so much value on the national elections, especially for president and Congress and the senators especially, when in reality, as I've said before, we live in an exact bizarro world from what the founding fathers intended, which was local, man. All politics is local. The people who control your life should be the people who see you on the street every single day. You're getting a little bit closer to that with the House of Representatives. But it's like, dude, Josh, I'm sure when Josh says that he's not going to vote, he's not going to vote for that particular candidate. But Josh would be a fool not to vote and get more involved. And I say this about myself, and get more involved at the local level. Because I do believe that the way things are going, we talk about national divorce and all these things, or moving closer to a confederation of states. You really are seeing states and especially municipalities doing their own thing, like counties. It's like, you know what? F you. We're going to do our own thing here. Screw your mask mandate. My sheriff's not going to support it. So that's where it is. And if you look at least in Texas, and I'm pretty sure it's like this everywhere, the power that a county sheriff has, it's really quite a bit. So when you're electing, you run to be county sheriff in Texas. That is an important position. But how many of us, and I'm trying to get better about this, how many of us in our audience could even tell you what the name of their sheriff is, especially if you're in a larger county? It's tough, man. So, man, those local elections, get involved, like Roger was saying locally. It's a pain in the butt, man. We all have full-time jobs. But man, unfortunately, the power has shifted from, or at least the perception of power has shifted from local to federal. And it should not be that way. We shouldn't really care who's president. I mean, of course we should care, but it should be less important to us than it actually is now. And I think it's been going that way for quite some time, maybe FDR started to turn a corner there. Of course, Abe Lincoln, but that was during a Civil War. And Josh, yep, the Anti-Federalists were right. I mean, you read those. If you've ever like tried to crack and read the Anti-Federalist Papers, that's a slog, man. That's a hard
Yeah,
thing to read. It is not easy.
yeah, yeah. It's no man. It's a tough read, but I mean, dude, the Anti-Federalists were spot on,
Yeah,
100%.
and that's a shame, but it's true. So yeah, it's the voting thing. I don't know if we answered Eric's question or not. I mean, it's going to be harder to rig a local election than it is, especially where I know Eric lives. It's going to be really difficult to rig that local election. Um, Therefore, I mean, you should have more faith in it, right? Is it? I mean, Time Magazine came out and said that the election was somewhat rigged. They said it themselves. It was on the cover of Time Magazine. A cabal of powerful elites and influencers came together to ensure that Biden was going to win the election. That is, I mean, that's kind of rigging. It's at least stacking the deck. So I understand. I mean, at the national level, I mean, it can be done, and there is fraud on the national level, but the local level is going to be really difficult to pull that off, I believe. And that's hence the importance of especially voting in local and state elections. I mean, Roger, am I leaving anything out here?
No, it's I was just gonna say, as we talk about national politics, it's always tough because, like, you feel slighted with Ted Cruz, and I would as well. You know what's going on in your town, and you know what's going on in your state. So I've got things I track: Mark Kelly and Andy Biggs and Sinema and Governor Ducey, and for the folks in PA, they've got their own issues, and it's different from state to state, right? That's why we have different electors and we have different representatives. It does go back to what Josh said at the beginning was, and this is what I imagine both parties have it, following more or voting more conservative and Republican. I guess I'm more privy to our side of the house, but it's you got to put up the right candidates. You have to put up the right candidates. You can't put up these crappy candidates. Now, going back to what I just caveated that with, it's tough because I'm looking at it from the perspective of an Arizonan, not necessarily what is important to somebody who lives in Pennsylvania. So it does get a little bit skewed, but at the end of the day, I mean, the GOP in some of these races, and even at the national level, when you go to the presidential races, I mean, I think we can all agree Romney and McCain, those were just throwaways. I actually felt like we were back in the old pecking order days where, hey, you know what, John, it's your turn to run, and we kind of know you're going to lose, and guess what, you lose, and then Romney runs, and there was probably a good couple weeks there where it's like, okay, Romney might actually pull this off just because of what his stances are when you look at the country as a whole, being more center, probably center left on a lot of especially social issues or what have you. But it goes back to putting forth the right candidates. I hope that locally, and this is where I say you have to get involved locally. Locally, I want to believe that we are putting forth the right candidates. It's hard to speak for Pennsylvania. It's hard to speak for other states because you don't know what their perspective is and what's important to them. What is kind of crazy when you started talking a little bit about Parliament and how you have to kind of come together. So send them out here. She went on McConnell's. I don't know if it was I think a McConnell building and part of some lecture with him or whatever. But she actually came out, and so she's one like, hey, we have to have the filibuster. And then she made a very, very strong statement about restoring the 60 vote minimum across the board, especially for judges. And I think she's playing the long game here because if it's a simple majority, you can pretty much go as extreme as you want. Once the majority whip gets involved and your majority leaders get involved, you're going to get the 51 votes if you're in power. Nowadays with the Senate, if you require a 60 vote minimum, it's going to have to be bipartisan. You're going to have some folks from the other side of the aisle that come over. Now, again, I don't think she's necessarily doing it because she's a fan for conservatives, but we've seen what's happened to the Supreme Court, and it has taken a giant leap to the conservative side. And I think in her mind, the political play is, and maybe I'm not giving her enough credit. Maybe she does actually give a crap. But I throw a political motivation there that like, hey, Democrats, the only way we stop getting our skulls smashed in is by going to this 60 vote minimum to bring more moderate judges or other officials into the mix. Now, at the same time, you say that it also works against you, right? Because some of those folks that you bring in that may be far left and extremely progressive, they also would not get voted in, or you wouldn't be able to obtain the 60 votes. So, maybe I shouldn't question her political motivation. We obviously do that with all politicians, but she's again, I've said it before. She, depending on who she runs against, and she is a Democrat, she'd make me question it. I'd take a look to see if she was running against Mitt Romney or something like that, I'd probably vote for her. There's a couple other issues that I have to look at or whatever. Which, by the way, did you know what's his name? Keith Olbermann. Did you know they were dating? Like
What?
10 years ago, they dated.
Cinema?
Yeah.
I thought she was a lesbian.
Well, now you see why she's a lesbian.
Okay, I was going to say that makes sense now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because Keith Olbermann, that dude is straight off the reservation. Like that guy is completely 100% as far left as you can get, which is really sad because I really enjoyed watching him on Sports Center, back in the day, before he just completely went batshit crazy.
Is he still even on like NBC or anything anymore, or does he even have a platform anymore?
I don't think so. He just rants on Twitter all day. Like I'm talking about like crazy person rants. Like if they're, they talk about, you red flag laws. Like that guy can't own a gun because of the rants like he goes on. Like, I mean, he calls for violence. He's like straight, like they need to send the military to arrest this person right now. Like, and you're like, oh, okay, man, do you own guns? Because, where do you live? Because I'm going to report you under your supported red flag laws.
When you talk about fascism, like those nuts on the left on Twitter, they are the fascists. I mean, it is exactly what you just said. This person said something I don't like. We need to send the police there. We need to go and arrest them and incarcerate their entire family. Yeah. You know who else popped her head up? Did you guys see Jen Psaki's interview? I think it was
Peppermint Patty came by, popped her head up.
I saw a little bit of it.
So she basically came on and said that, talking about the midterms, if it is a referendum on the president, the Democrats will lose. And she was pretty straight-faced about that. And we've talked about this a million times, right? You have to change the subject, go to something else that's a little bit more. Abortion's the big thing that they're trying to spin everybody up on. But right now, when they did a nationwide poll, it's in this order: most important to least important: economy, education, inflation, crime, and last being abortion. So it's actually interesting. I'm not a fan of her at all. I think we've criticized her a lot, but we see just how far these folks have to go when they take a position like the press secretary. They know what's going on. Now, Karine, I think she's a complete idiot. She looked haggard. Like she looked tired today. When I saw her she was taking some questions from Peter Doocy. Dude, she's going to have to take a knee because she was beat up. She looked frustrated, just not very articulate. It's like, hey, the midterms are coming up and you're going to have to be out here every single day and cleaning up the messes, answering questions. She looked like she needed to take a knee. But it was pretty interesting to hear Psaki come out and actually say what everybody already knows. Hey, man, the president's not doing a good job across the board. New polls are coming out. It has his approval rating back down in the 30s again. When you look, they're trying to spin everybody up on the abortion piece. But I'll tell you, and I'll throw it to Josh for his piece on this. Going back to Roe v. Wade, and we were chatting a little bit about this. Roe v. Wade has done more to hurt women's rights, reproductive rights, whatever you want to call it, than anything. Because Arizona, and Pima County covers Tucson, they actually said, hey, this archaic abortion law that we have that I think initially was written in like 1890s, the idea of it, and then finally passed in the early 1900s, basically outlaws all abortions with the exception of the immediate health of the mom. So she's going to die having this baby, we can have an abortion. Everything else is illegal right now in the state of Arizona. And there are a lot of people that are pissed off about this. But what's happened is, and this is what I don't understand, because Roe v. Wade was out there for so long, states never legislated any of this stuff. Now, a couple of them did. I think Florida did. I think Texas did. I think Missouri, and maybe Kansas had previously legislated it, but most states didn't legislate this stuff. And normally there's a gradual move as society changes, as cultural, the cultures change, we evolve a little bit, the mindset starts evolving a little bit, it changes. The laws tend to go along with that. So over the course of the last 100 years, you would have had a gradual change towards one way or the other, or maybe just stayed the same, just depending on what's going on in that state. But with Roe versus Wade, you basically said, okay, this is codified law of the land, which it wasn't. And we've talked about that before, how it was one of the worst rulings that ever come out of the Supreme Court. So everybody should have been prepared. But what happened was a lot of these states, they stopped legislating abortions for obvious reasons because of Roe v. Wade. And so now you have 100 years where there was no gradual change, and now they're all butthurt. And it's like, hey, I hate to break this to them, but in accordance with the Supreme Court ruling, governor can't just do an executive order. They're like, if I'm elected, and that's Katie Hobbs. If I'm elected, you're not going to do anything. What's going to happen is it has to be legislated at the state level, and whatever the people in that state, those voters choose, that's what will pass. So it's, I know I got off topic there or whatever, but that's one of those things where they think that Roe v. Wade helped out women and protected their rights. No, it didn't. It stopped the legislative process for probably 40 of the states. And so now you have some of these restrictive, extremely restrictive, that may not be conducive with what the popular thinking or the voter, what their desires are in that state.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it, and that's a very good point. To think about it like that. That Roe v. Wade was on the books for so long that people were just like, "No, man, we're good," because Roe v. Wade, and they never codified it, in legislation. Um, that's but that speaks back to a lot of people upset because they like, oh, Roe v. Wade should have stood, the federal government should pass a law, stuff like that. It's like, again, people are so reliant on the federal government for their needs, that it's maddening. They don't understand that the federal government will, a government large enough and powerful enough to give you everything you need is powerful enough to take it all away. And a lot of people don't understand that, by the Supreme Court saying, ruling how they ruled. They were, people were like, oh, you're taking our rights away. It's like, no, they're giving them back to you. They are literally saying that the federal government doesn't have a say, and like you say, go get involved locally, where you have a little bit more, a little more wasta, to affect change. Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on, I think. So I just got a couple of last things, and then I'll kick it over to Luke. A couple of shout outs. One, Steve, really appreciate you listening. Steve up in Maryland. He just dropped his he dropped his retirement papers a while ago, but he just had his last day of work on Friday, and so retiring, made the he's big W5. So he's gonna have to take his really dirty coffee cup, and go somewhere else. Hopefully it's on a nice beach somewhere where you can enjoy some relaxation after, I forget how many years, but I think it was like 30. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so shout out to him. Hey, shout out to Aaron. Really appreciate you listening up in Washington State. And then real quick, one of our listeners sent us to me, and he does not have the Book of Faces, but he sent this to me after our last episode where we got talking about illegal immigration writ large, and we kind of talked about skilled labor versus unskilled labor and stuff like that. Well, so he said it, and I quote, "We need Julio the welder and Vihey the engineer because all we can produce is Willow, the misgendered barista with 100,000 in unpaid student loans and a BA in whore life studies. We don't need unskilled laborers. We have a shit ton already." So I thought that was good enough, and warranted a shout out. So definitely appreciate you sending that in. So that's all I got. I'll throw it over to Luke for his final.
I got a few final thoughts here after I clear my throat. Jiminy Christmas, that was a frog. So those are wise words. Those are wise words. Wish I knew that guy better. Maybe I do. First of all, folks, we're kind of getting fed up with Facebook. I think Josh got his 100th warning today for posting some meme. It was ridiculous, and they was just like, no, it was totally uncalled for. And Facebook gave him a warning, and it's like, man, Facebook is just kind of garbage, you know. Honestly, lately the only things I've been looking at on Facebook are like my wife's pictures that she took that day, and then I was there with her. It's like, and I'm glad that Facebook is there because and I look at my memories too. What stupid nonsense was I spouting off 12 years ago? And there is some entertaining stuff, but we're getting tired of it, man. I mean, we encourage y'all to head over our Facebook page, check it out, maybe make some comments if you can, but man, hit up our website, man, culperscanteencup.com. And hit up YouTube, man. I mean, if you're on the way out with Facebook, hit us up on YouTube, man. Put some comments in there, and we'll start a discussion there. It could be fun. It's a social media platform too, man. Just hit us up any way you can. It's good stuff. But shout out, I don't know. I mean, shout out to all those poor UT fans that had to walk out of Jones Stadium with their heads hung low on Saturday. UT fans, man. Look, I don't know how you guys are when you go visit somewhere, but man, I kind of keep a low profile, man. You'd be lucky if I wear my team's colors. I go to watch and support my team. Yes, I will cheer, but I don't cheer like I'm at home. Okay, I don't do that. Yeah, it's one is respect, I guess. The other was I don't want to get my ass kicked because man, there's some unruly fans out there. It's like, okay, I'm going to show some respect because I don't want anybody coming to my house and saying these things. But also, I don't want to get my ass kicked because you never know who you're messing with, especially these days, man. You have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, looks like he weighs 120 pounds soaking wet. So UT fans are not like that. They are obnoxious when they're, when they're visiting. They're obnoxious. And for the first time in my life, I sat on the visitor side. That would be the east side of Jones Stadium. Because we got some tickets we could afford over there. And, oh, God, there were a bunch of UT fans around me, and I kind of did a poll. I was like, so did you go to UT? Did you go to UT? I only found one that was sitting around me that actually went to UT. And this woman was not even wearing, the burnt orange and white or whatever. She was just dressed normally. But everyone's cheering for UT. We call them Walmart UT fans, man. They go to Walmart, especially in Lubbock, Texas, and they find their cheap UT gear because it's half off because everybody buys tech gear in Lubbock. And they just decide, you know what, I'm going to be a UT fan. I remember Ricky Williams. I remember the last time they were good. And they're so annoying. And at the end, there was a family sitting in front of me, and they're just cheering their heads off for UT. And it was crazy because I was like, so what's y'all's story? I try to be friendly and talk to people around me. But they were like, well, my wife went to UT. So that was the one UT fan around us. I went to Southwest Texas State University, and we're here because my sons played football with a kid that's on the Texas Tech team now. And I'm like, so what tie besides your wife? And the wife wasn't even cheering for UT, but I was like, what tie do you have with this school? And then the all-time great was this whore sitting in front of us with like these super long blonde hair extensions, like 2-inch fake fingernails on. She goes, oh, well, I went to UTSA. And I'm like, bitch, you smoking? It's like, why are you cheering for UT? Why are you cheering for the Longhorns, man? Horns down. But anyway, I went off on the guy. I didn't go off on it, but I kind of jokingly, tongue-in-cheek said, toward the end, the game was so close, back and forth, really great game. And I said, they were getting all upset because UT was, letting the game slip away. And they were very upset about that. And I said, see, that's the problem with you UT fans. And I was saying it loud and proud. I was like, see, y'all feel entitled to a win. You feel entitled to it. As a Texas Tech fan, we just want to see a good game. We lose by a field goal. It's like, well, at least it was a good game. Y'all get upset because you're entitled fans. So there's my rant on UT. And it was so good to see them leave Jones Stadium, hopefully for the last time, with a loss. It was delicious because they're going over to the SEC and they're going to get, man, if they're having problems with Tech, brother, there's a little school in Louisiana called Louisiana State University that is going to annihilate you. And I think that Alabama game was a fluke because UT is just not that good. But anyway, that's my rant on the college football. I wish we could have gone in more on that. I thought it was a good weekend. Florida State played some community college, Bunker Hill Community College, something. I was hoping
Oh yeah,
that UNC would beat my second most hated team, uh, Notre Dame, but yeah, that was a tough
I lost
loss.
money on that game too,
Oh,
man.
dude, I was
hey,
so hoping that would happen.
I will point out that that Florida State beat LSU.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Florida State, I think, is
so
pretty good this year, man. They're 4-0, but so is Kansas. So, what are you gonna do?
yeah, next episode we got to get into. We really have to get into college football, man, because the polls, especially the ESPN poll, was such bullshit. You had teams that lost that moved up, and teams that won moved down. It's such bullshit.
Yeah, they've got. Yeah, we'll next episode we'll do some college football. So, yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate it, and I'll kick it to Roger.
So I know we're getting towards the end of our episode here. Any of you guys following the Black Adam movie, The Rock?
I know that
What?
there's a movie coming out called Black Adam, and The Rock is in it. That's the extent
Well, I
of it.
think it's already out. My question is, so it is box office ticket sales or whatever. It's going to be the lowest DC Comics movie outside of those that were released during the COVID years. And so I was just kind of wondering, and we don't have to get into it right now because we're towards the end of this, but it's like, so you have a black superhero. Do you think race plays a factor in ticket sales as far as most comic? And I actually did some gurgling today too about this thing, talking about how many black comic book writers you have. You know, when you're young kids, you know, do young black kids aspire to be comic book heroes and this and that? So anyway, I'll leave it to our listeners out
Yeah,
there. Do a little bit of gurgling on it. It's pretty interesting.
I don't think that plays. I think Black Adam is a dumb superhero, first of all. But I don't think that race has anything to do with that because look how well Black Panther did.
I was just about to say it was over $1 billion for Black Panther.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't seen any of them. I don't, outside of like Superman and some of the early Batmans or whatever. I generally don't watch a lot of those things, but just kind of curious. So thanks for shooting my theory down.
The racists are just trying to put race into everything because they're the actual racists.
Did you see though that you know because they got Ariel, you know, the mermaid princess, you know, from the Disney, is being played by a black actress apparently in a live action something. So, you know, I'm all for progress, and I'm also for, you know, I saw that Chris Hemsworth's name being kicked around for a biopic on Rosa Parks. So I mean, I guess that's good.
Fully support.
Well, and I do. Now we talk about it. I do agree with you. It's like some superheroes are just sucky, and so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter, man, woman. I thought they did a great job with Wonder Woman,
Yeah.
not 1984, but the
They're-
original.
Yeah.
Some
These
of them just
people are
suck.
these people are so ridiculous because the same people who are like, well, I mean, it's fine for, you know, a black actor to play Ariel, right? Were the same people who lost their shit that Remy Malik played Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody and not somebody who is actually gay. Right? They got upset about that. But then they're like, well, no, anybody can play Ariel. It's like, dude, just shut up. Whatever. It's so ridiculous.
So all I got from that is Remy Malik is not gay.
No, and people were upset about it. Like the left was the left was genuinely upset about that he played Freddie Mercury, and he did an amazing job at it.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. He did. They didn't get a fat guy to play Elvis either. Body shaming.
Hey, I actually had that down. That comes down to food neutrality. Have you guys seen the commercial or the thing that it was one of the schools, right? One of the schools sent out this thing. There's this big thing now on food neutrality, removing the moral value like good, bad, healthy, and unhealthy, where the ladies like are holding up these donuts. Like that's bad for you. You can't say that anymore. I'm like, no, that will actually give you probably Rona and a heart attack.
Dude, yes. And it's some of the universities. Is this what you're talking about? Some of the universities are, some of the student groups are having movements to take the nutritional value labels off of like the, you know, wherever you go to the chow hall, the dining facility, whatever they call it. I can't remember in college. And it's like, no, you know, you shouldn't feel guilty about eating that donut, and the calorie counter being up there makes you feel more guilty about it. You should just eat, you know, what you feel like eating, what makes you feel good. And I'm like, God, it's not, it's ridiculous, man.
No, you know what? I'm good with it. Take all the nutritional value off of there, because if you wanna gorge your face on donuts, gorge your face on donuts because your life expectancy is going to drop. And we'll be done with you sooner, rather than later. It's kind of like did you guys see the FDA had to put out do not cook chicken in NyQuil?
Yeah.
You know what? At a certain point, you just have to take the labels off of everything and just let nature take its course.
And let
You know?
Darwin do his work.
Yes, dude. Your owner's manual, your car used to tell you how to tweak your valves. It used to tell you these things. It used to tell you, hey, here's compression, here's what you need to set it at, blah blah. And now it tells you, don't drink the water out of your battery terminals. At a certain point, we really have to take the instruction manuals and just let nature take its course.
It'll all just work itself out.
It will.
Work itself out. Good Lord. Real quick shout out. Got two of them. One, want to thank Big Game James. Finally got my coffee mug from Josh. That is a massive coffee mug. Well, he's like 6'11", so it probably fits perfect in his hands. But I literally have to. I can fit my whole hand in the handle. So I'm just like, this is the perfect coffee mug for him. But in states I go to that I can't carry legally my concealed weapon, I will take that coffee mug with me because I can definitely use that for some self-defense and put a hole in somebody's skull. So thanks, James. It's a big, it means a lot to us that you're out there listening and to receive those type of gifts, truly honored. Also shout out to those that are in the path of the hurricane or Hurricane Ian. I think now it's crossing through Cuba or getting ready to go through Cuba. I think the western end. The last I heard today was I think they changed the track. So it looks like it's going right through Tampa and then heading a little bit farther east. And I know that can change a lot. So out here in Arizona, fortunately, we don't have to deal a lot of that stuff. I know, Joe, you're listening. We go back and forth with wind speeds and this and that, but hurricanes are no joke. I think most of those are longtime listeners remember the Minute with Mo that turned into a marathon with Mo when he was talking about something with his freezer going bad and filling up coolers of ice for like 18 weeks with his dad somewhere in Homestead. But for those that are in that path out there, we're praying for you. Be safe. Don't do anything stupid. I mean, none of us are Superman. I get it. We all sit there, no, man, we're good. We're good. We're going to hunker down. Hey, if you're in the path, get out of the area if you've got somewhere to go. If not, make sure you reach out to Culper's Canteen Cup. Hit us up on our email or Facebook, and you can go stay at Josh's house for the weekend. I'm sure he'll be fine with that. So with that being said, keep your canteen cups tightly secured and full of some good whiskey.